Hello, everybody. This is your girl, Suzanne Monk. I am in studio doing an interview, a pre-recorded interview. These aren't very common yet, but there's certainly something we're going to do more of in the show. But I'm really excited to have, for my first pre-recorded interview, guest here on this double screen, candidate Daniel Burke, who is running for U.S. Senate in New Jersey against Cory Booker. Daniel, welcome to the show. We appreciate you being on the show. Now, I took a little bit of information before we started this interview, and you are running as an independent, but I know you're also close with the LaRouchian group. You're part of the LaRouchians who have been fighting and defending President Trump. You guys are literally out in colleges with your signs, defend Trump and the coup. So tell me how those two things, what made you decide to run as an independent, and how do you feel about the president, and how do those two things go together for you?
Okay, so I've been a political activist with the LaRouche movement for about 8 years. And so the first 5 years of that, I was campaigning all over New Jersey and New York with a big picture of Obama with a Hitler mustache, calling for him to be impeached. Okay, so we have been really active, and I've personally very much been fighting, to defend the Constitution from the kind of crap that we're getting from Obama, who was an absolute terror, who I think we really needed to throw out. And but thanks to people who fought against him, I think we created a context for President Trump to come in and do what he's done, which is heroic. But since the beginning, see, here's what happened to me: is I was watching from the beginning what was going on with Trump in the very first part of his first year in office, and I saw that he was being attacked viciously, and it was totally insane. And then the news dropped that Robert Mueller was going to be the special prosecutor. And that really transformed things for me personally, because I realized just how serious it was. Many people have been talking to me about it, including in the LaRouche PAC and otherwise. But then I saw for myself, oh my gosh, they're really going to try to crucify the guy and to throw him out of office. And this has much to do with the history of Lyndon LaRouche, who passed about a year ago next week. And he was put into prison by a witch hunt that was led by Robert Mueller 30 years ago. So that opened it up for me. And since that time, I have been campaigning with the LaRouche PAC primarily to defend Trump from the coup. This is a picture of me in January. Yeah.
What a great thing to put on your campaign flyer. What a great thing.
Yeah. I got a lot of response. We got this flyer out, about 3,000 of them at the president's rally in Wildwood.
Yes. And let's talk about that a second, Daniel, because that was a huge rally. I have some friends who were out there. I know Andre Soriano was out there at the rally, had a wonderful time. And we've talked several times. He was so impressed at the amount of conservatives that were out there in what is typically a very blue region of the country. We were also very impressed that when you look at ticket sales, there were a lot of Democrats that were there to the rally. So speak a little bit about the New Jersey demographic, and I feel like changing demographic.
Well, it's well known actually here in New Jersey that the largest number of people are neither registered as Democrats or Republicans, but are actually registered as independents. But I would take a look at the situation with Wildwood, because of course these numbers come from Brad Parscale, the president's campaign manager, who put out 175,000 ticket requests, which I believe is a record. And then 23, 24, 25% of them were Democrats, and 10% of them didn't vote 4 years ago. So he's mobilizing people who were demoralized and depressed. But think about the context, and then in that context, take a look at my campaign, because the rally would never have happened if it wasn't for the fact that Jeff Van Drew, a Democrat, stood up against what was being done to destroy the Constitution and try to remove the president. And then he broke from it, and he actually, apparently, he told Trump in their discussion when he decided to switch to the Republican Party, I'm only going to do this, President Trump, if you come and rally for me, if you come and campaign for me. So I think that puts it in the proper view, which is that the issue today is leadership. It is, and if you think that we're going to back up Trump by following along, the sort of the standard party procedure, I would really challenge that. I think that's a recipe for disaster. He needs thinking people. He doesn't need cheerleaders.
Well, and we have done this a few times in my lifetime, at least. I know I was very involved in the Tea Party movement,
Yeah.
and I know we, as a voting bloc, sent what we felt were Tea Party uh, people who
Yeah.
believed in our same values. We sent them up to Congress. They hit a wall of establishment republicanism. And
Yes.
literally, we watched our heroes that we sent out there to fight for us, our paladins, get eaten alive by Congress, by the establishment Republicans in Congress, who quickly started blaming them for all of their failures and turning the party mechanism against these individuals.
Okay.
And
So
we did it again. Now we're doing it with Trump, but I think we're doing it smarter this time because we know the establishment is going to do that at this point. And so this is really a different game, I think.
yeah, I think you're right. People have gotten a lot smarter. They realize what they're up against, and we have to sort of let me paint that picture very briefly. I mean, when I was campaigning to impeach Obama, there was one man who really made sure it didn't happen, and that was John Boehner.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Boehner actually stood in and prevented that from happening.
Right.
He sent the Congress home early in the summer. I think it was the summer of 2015 when there was actually a lot of motion in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And then you think about what Paul Ryan did to just completely, hamstring the president in the first couple of years of his presidency.
Correct.
So if the issue therefore is actually ideas, that's my view. And what we're trying to figure out is how do you break through, the swampiness? How do you break through, and not just that, but the demoralization, the problems that people have had, but take advantage of this enormous optimism that has been unleashed by the president, and then get things going that'll make the difference. A big thing that I'm fighting for is the sort of the focus of my campaign. You can see from my campaign literature is end the coup, colonize Mars. In other words, the space program.
Did you not love the moment last night in the State of the Union where President Trump brought on the grandson of the Tuskegee Airmen and talked about his ambitions to join the Space Force? And you could literally see in that moment something Tim Rush and I from the LaRouche Group, our good friend, we talk about this a lot, the enthusiasm and excitement that this can bring to the youth. And you saw that pinpointed right there in that moment. So it's amazing that you're talking about that because I think people read colonize Mars and they're like, oh boy. But what you're actually talking about is building the space program, building back American excellence, and exactly all of those dreams that young man had. That's what you're talking about creating.
Yes. Well, look, okay, let me put it forward in this way. One is that I'm 33. So when I was 15, I walked into math class and they told me that the World Trade Center had been hit by a plane. Right. And that defined my whole adult life.
Right.
Wars based on lies, endless wars, veteran suicides, all types of catastrophes that followed that, and 1 million people killed in Iraq. This is, by the way, this is the 30th year of war in Iraq. All right, now if we do our job, then the thing is that my daughter, who's about 1 year and 8 months, when she's 6 years old, she's going to see Americans walking on the moon. And that's going to define her future. It's going to be one of optimism and excitement and the exploration of science and technology into the solar system. And I want to make a strong point that it's very important to campaign on these issues. In this, I discuss not just merely the idea of Mars as a project, but the fact that this is actually started by President Trump. Right. In the same section of his speech, he talked about how what we need is full funding for the Artemis program. And the Artemis program is the proposal from NASA, which he signed into law, or he created, established, which is that would actually take us, we're going to send Americans to the moon, around the moon, and come back in 2022. They're not going to land, they're going to go around it. Right. And then my generation only ever saw Tom Hanks do that, right? And then we're going to, in 2024, we're going to land them on the moon, and they're going to spend perhaps a week, perhaps 2 weeks total. 2 astronauts. The first woman is going to walk on the moon in 2024. And he said, look, we need full funding for this. Right. Because what's happening is there's a Democrat from Oklahoma who was working together with a Democrat from the Bronx, and they put together a proposal to basically scrap the moon. We're just not going to worry about going to the moon. We're going to push it off to 2028.
Right.
What they really are saying is, let's not do any of this. Let's just push it off forever, because they know that if they can get it outside of 2024, President Trump's last year of his second term, that they can prevent it from happening.
Right.
And that's really what we're up against.
Well, and it's funny, they actually feed a lot of conspiracy theories as well when we continue to ignore going to the moon, knowing space exploration. A lot of people ask, why did that stop? Why did we used to go to the moon? And then all of a sudden it's like we just don't go to the moon anymore. I don't think we learned everything we could possibly learn from going to the moon, but obviously there was something completely different from the days of space exploration and modern times.
I think first of all, that's a funny irony, right? That like you can have sympathy for people who think we never went, because it's almost less believable that we went and then we didn't do anything about it for 50 years.
Yeah, really.
Now, the specific issue that we're trying to raise here is that Mr. LaRouche, Lyndon LaRouche, who founded our organization 30 years ago in 1986, the same year that Robert Mueller went after him for the first time, he said, look, why don't we go towards the industrialization of the moon and then go on to Mars? And the purpose of doing this is not to visit and then come back with a couple of moon rocks, although moon rocks are really cool. But that's not the issue. The issue is to actually begin the process of getting the human economy going out there further and further, which is going to require new sciences and technologies that will be applied in our physical economy on Earth and in our country.
Yeah, the purpose is to actually engage that frontier. The final frontier, as we were told many times as children in Star Trek episodes. But that is we here on Earth. There's still stuff we're exploring on Earth, but it's a finite space, and the next frontier is obviously off of Earth. So
that's true, and it will create new technologies which will go to the production of things like steel and high-tech manufacturing in the United States. This is what happened with the Apollo program.
Correct.
Every dollar that was invested into the Apollo program returned at least $10 in terms of the total, production of that investment.
Technology like this little phone.
Yeah, exactly.
So many of the things we have and we use today came from innovations that were made through just technological needs in space. It needs to do something in space. That technology, that science gets applied to practical products here that we in America can use, which of course not only makes our lives better, but makes money for the people who build the product, who make the product, who design the product, who own the company, who deliver the product. It creates so many jobs and so much economic value.
I would say to people, like, imagine when the president has full funding for Artemis, and when we even go beyond that, then if you like Elon Musk and these other, private guys who are doing it, they're going to be able to invest so much more they're going to be able to get so much more investment from people who are going to say, all right, this is the winning bet, right? The American government is making sure this is happening. The American President Trump is making sure this is happening. So we can make a lot of risk in this direction, and it's going to result in enormous progress. And I'll say one thing excuse me, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and it opens up opportunities for the folks who think that the Elon Musks of the world are, two at the top. It also opens up opportunity for other innovators, for people who want to break in, who want to compete with Elon Musk, and it makes it more possible for them. So now we actually have a rich, diverse market, which is so much healthier.
I totally agree. I mean, New Jersey, look, I live in the area where North Jersey, where all you got to do is drive about 10 minutes and you're going to see a machine tool shop that has been massively degraded or shut down. Mm-hmm. This state used to be the machine tool, the engineering and science capital of the country. Yeah. It wasn't just that we had Einstein here. We had the highest per capita number of scientists in New Jersey. Yeah. We have the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory where they're working on fusion. But these things are not being supported. They're not being not because the president doesn't want to, but because the Congress is such a disaster.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about because you're running for Senate. Yeah. So your solution to all of these problems is to get in the door and be able to be a voice inside and use your knowledge and educate. I mean, just educate the senators would be a great thing to do right now. They're very ignorant on a lot of things. We know this is a really important year for in the Trump movement. Obviously, the impeachment hoax has made us very clear that if we don't take back the House, we have wasted this president's time in office. And I have said all throughout 2019, we also need to take back a few seats in the Senate. We need to increase our margin in the Senate so we have more protections for President Trump so we can deal with the issues like healthcare. We did not repeal or replace. That hasn't happened yet. There are some things that we sent the president to do that he has been unable to do because of foot dragging, frankly, in the first 2 years by what I would call rhinos, as they had both branches. So how else do you explain that? But certainly also now we literally have a Democrat Party who wants to just be a wall to anything the president does, and they don't like walls. So that's a weird. But so you want to come in and you want to now. Let's talk about what policies, what committees would you want to do? Where are you going to take your focus? Because being a senator there's a lot of things going on up there. What will you do with your position?
Well, the key thing that I actually have a slightly contrary way of answering that,
Okay.
which is to say that I think we need to build a national support. And so it's not something that merely one person can do, is my point. We need to build a national support for policies that will back up the potential for the president to be a builder.
Right.
Okay, I'll put it to you that way.
Sure.
And what I've been really working on is this idea of the 4 laws.
Okay.
It's a certain economic program that the people that I associate with, we are really supporting and discussing with a lot of people, which was presented by Mr. LaRouche, the Economist, about 5 years ago. But everything still is very much required. We're talking about I'll go through it briefly.
Sure.
The key thing is we want to reindustrialize the United States with high-tech manufacturing and high-tech infrastructure.
Right.
If you look at the fact that in China last year, they built about 3,000 miles of high-speed rail in 1 year. Mm-hmm. So they built something that went all the way across the United States effectively in 1 year. We have nothing. Right. We should be fighting to change that. And I don't accept any of the grumbling excuses that people have. I don't care. We got to change things. Just like Trump said, all right, well, get rid of some of these regulations that are preventing us from building highways. This is stupid. Correct. So we should change our conditions so that we can affect that kind of thing, which means we want to get large numbers of people to work on really advanced stuff. Mm-hmm. And, he's trying to do that, but we haven't really been able to pull it off because you need an enormous amount of credit going to that type of project. Right. And right now, instead of credit going towards physical industry and development, we're loaning $120 billion a night at the Federal Reserve to the Wall Street banks. Right. And we just started $60 billion a month QE.
Will you repeat that number again for everybody? Because it's such a big, ridiculous number. I know. Hear it twice.
I mean, I imagine what $120 billion can do, right? $120 billion a night is being lent by the Federal Reserve to the Wall Street banks for what they call intrabank lending. Mm-hmm. And the overnight markets. Right. And much of that is being returned. But look at the trend, okay? And now, first of all, not all of it is. There's at least like $300 or $400 billion that's permanent bailout. It's on the permanent asset sheets of the Federal Reserve. But look at the trend. When this started in September, it was like $30 billion a night. Mm-hmm. Then it became suddenly 60, 75, 100, and now 120 billion. So where does it stop? Right. The issue, therefore, is instead of this Federal Reserve nonsense, we're calling for a national banking approach. And this is how we founded the country. The idea is that we should be extending credit towards those projects that actually industrialize the country.
Sure. That's exactly the reason you're supposed to, it says in where's my little guy? Here we go. When you read my favorite little book, the Constitution, right? Yes. It says very much so that is what, Congress is able to collect, levy fines, fees, and taxes.
Absolutely.
To build an army and to promote the general well-being, which is what infrastructure projects are designed to do. They promote the general well-being so that the people then can prosper and make that rich economy and that diverse community that Americans have come to know and love, and we're losing slowly.
I think that's so important because there's a lot of people who have been, in my view, heavily tricked by a conservative free market ideology, which is actually, you'll notice that's not President Trump's view.
No.
And the effect is that Gary Cohn, globalist Gary, the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, he gets in as the first economic advisor to President Trump. And look at all the people who were the first, advisors to President Trump. They were a nasty bunch. Thank goodness he kicked them out.
Sure.
But largely, almost all of them, except for Michael Flynn, who got poached from him by these insane lunatics.
Right.
But the point is that Gary Cohn had promoted a policy for infrastructure development, which they say it's free market. And what's free market mean? It means that Goldman Sachs makes a mint,
Right.
and the projects don't actually get built because they're demanding that within 10 years or something like that, we want 10% back in addition to the whole thing. And so you're only talking about building things that have user fees.
Correct.
And there's a lot of things that we are going to have to build that are not, you don't want to put up, tolls on these new projects.
And coming from, I spent 27 years living in Illinois, they kept promising us that the tolls were there just to build the roads and they would go, they were done, and they never went away and they kept going up. So once you let the government start taking money from the individual, they're not going to give up on that.
Yeah, that's an income stream, right? And then what happens is a bunch of bankers and hedge fund guys come in and say, "Oh, I want a piece of that," and they engineer the rules so that you're not actually getting progress and economic development.
Right.
So then the thing that is sort of essential to this is sort of the final part of it, and very important to do as a piece of it, is this question of Glass-Steagall.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a little story for you to show you a little bit about how I've operated as a political activist, which was that in 2015, in July, Hillary Clinton gave her big economic speech in Manhattan.
Right.
It was supposed to be the big opening of her economic policy. And I went to it and I said to myself, well, gee, maybe she's going to have a Damascus Road conversion and she's going to say something worthwhile. All right, I'll see. I wasn't going in to try to wreck things up. But at a point, it became really clear that she was not going to discuss the urgent need for Glass-Steagall, which had just been introduced into the Senate the week prior.
Right.
Glass-Steagall, which separates out the speculative part of the banking system from the commercial banking system, such that the bankers cannot gamble with your deposits.
Right.
And
that way, the bank that has your mortgage that's taking your monthly payment, it can't take that monthly payment, play on the stock market, and make a bunch of money off of your money speculating, and obviously creating a lack of stability under the financial system that's supporting your property.
Yeah, precisely, because, and I would say to specify, look at the derivatives that they were gambling in, which is much, much larger even than the stock market, which is unfortunately a bubble. Right. Is not connected to the actual progress of the physical economy. But the thing is that they do that because they assume that they're going to get bailed out, because as long as you don't have a Glass-Steagall standard in there, which was repealed in '99 under Bill Clinton, as long as you don't have that in there, then the banks can say, well, we made a few bad bets and now the whole thing's crashing, but you got to bail the whole thing out because we also have your commercial loans, so don't you dare to leave us high and dry.
Yes, and we see what happened in, for example, in the Enron situation. The collapse actually impacted many individuals across the country who lost their retirement packages, lost their investments. The company can take these CEOs, these folks, these companies can take a big hit. Our president himself has filed for bankruptcy and taken his companies in and out of bankruptcy several times. It's a lot harder for somebody at 70, 80 years old to have lost their retirement.
Some of the people who are working with me on my campaign, they lost their homes, and 10 years they trying to recover from that financial crash. And all of the crisis was passed on to the American people. There should have been a moratorium on foreclosures. People should have been kept in their homes because it was not what was popularly pressed, which was that, oh, gee, it's your fault because you got a bad loan, you got a bad mortgage. It's definitely your fault, American citizen. Right. No, it's not. Right. The derivatives that were organized on top of the mortgage loans were 20 times bigger. Right. The bubble was 20 times larger than the mortgage loans were actually worth. Yes. And that was allowable because of the repeal of Glass-Steagall. So
and the criminality that we saw, and I've seen several documentaries on that, on the mortgage meltdown, the criminality that we saw in the banking system, in the mortgage lenders, because the money was so fast and so easy to get. They themselves talk about violating the law a little bit more, encouraging people to lie more on their forms, lying for people. So that collusion, you talk about, well, the loan owner, the loan taker is responsible, but the person who gave out the loan, who is behaving criminally, also responsible. And that's something that, my conservative free market folks sometimes get a little frustrated. Similarly with the student loan bubble that we're seeing, they get a little frustrated with a practical process to get out of that. And I've often talked about, we have a system by which we cannot file for bankruptcy. Any other debt you take on, you can at some point absolve yourself from that. And of course, you have to die to get rid of your debt. So, we have a similar system in which the government and the banking industry are working together. And who ends up getting taken to the cleaners? Who ends up taking the cost, eating that cost? It's the American people.
Well,
again,
I really agree with you. And the thing that people should just do is this is not an attack on the idea of personal responsibility. Sure. That's not what it is. This is a question of a judgment of a system.
Correct.
What are the rules of the system? Because our government should put together a system that actually promotes economic development, increases physical productivity, promotes scientific and technological research, and defends the workers of this country.
The workers of this country. And I think what's so important is that I want the same responsibility that is on the worker and the middle class individual and the guy who's having the mortgage, that same responsibility to be on the CEOs who at this point, under our current system, can do things that we would never get away with, and the government supports them and bails them out when they make mistakes.
Okay, so here's the story, is that I went to Hillary Clinton's event, and it became clear she wasn't going to say anything about it. So I stood up and I said, "Senator Clinton, will you restore Glass-Steagall?" And I shouted it a few times, and because I've studied a voice training with the LaRouche movement where we promoted classical music, so I got a pretty good voice for that. So then... So I got thrown out by the Secret Service, and they took all my information. Right. And I got interviewed by about 8 different major newspapers because it was known that this was a big issue, but no one was going to talk about it. And then later that day, her campaign advisor announced that you would never see Glass-Steagall under Hillary Clinton. She was absolutely not going to allow it to happen. And this was at the same time that people were talking about the $300,000 speeches she was given for Goldman Sachs. Right. So about a year later, in October of 2016, right before the election, President Trump came out in South Carolina, I believe, maybe it was North Carolina, and he gave a speech where he said, "We need a 21st century Glass-Steagall." Right. And what I'm saying here is that I believe, my view, looking at the whole situation, is that he can grab control of the economy in an even greater way. He's done something really, really important and dramatic, but he needs greater tools to be able to accomplish what he wants to do. Right. And if he takes this kind of approach that I've described here, then here's what that does. It means that mini Mike Bloomberg and the other green fascist billionaires who are trying to drive the country into depopulation policies, they can be defeated.
Correct. There's finally an opportunity for that. And, it's one of the things that I find most interesting about President Trump, and I watch him very carefully. Reinstating Glass-Steagall, or a version of Glass-Steagall, is really, in my mind, building an economic infrastructure, rebuilding that economic, not just the physical infrastructure, but an economic infrastructure that Americans can use and prosper within. And it's so important. So, can we talk just for a few minutes real quick about the Federal Reserve and what you think is happening there? And I know a lot of folks on my side of the Trump fence, have been pushing for some of
auditing
us
the Fed
altogether. Whether we wanted it audited or just shut down, there's a little bit of a range in there. But I do know President Trump has been, he's been engaging it, but he's run into some walls there. Tell me what you think about what's going on with the Fed and what we should be doing going forward.
Okay, so I have another contrary position to present, which is that I think that this is President Trump's Achilles heel. And I think that, he has put out, if you compare the things that he was saying when Obama was president to what he's saying now about the Federal Reserve, he's right now absolutely saying, lower the interest rates and get the quantitative easing going, print the money. That's what Trump is saying right now.
Sure.
And I love Trump, so I know that he has some kind of hypothesis about what he's doing, that he knows he's trying to do something that will be best for the country.
Right.
And I can imagine how he might have come to those conclusions that, this is the, he's going to have to pump as much out of the economy as he can before he can deal with something.
Sure.
But I'm very concerned there's a crash coming.
Right.
And that if he keeps on the approach that he's taking, that he's going to open himself up completely for being blamed for it, which they're going to try to do anyway. Right. And so I'm urging that we fight for him to take preemptive measures. And that does mean that we go to the Federal Reserve. I like the fact that he job owns the Federal Reserve, because why the heck should this independent, why should they be independent? Why should the central bank run our country's monetary system when we have they're not voted?
No, we have no control. We have so little control of who is on that board.
And the idea that Trump has to be we have to be politically separate or somehow I'm not supposed to comment on them is total nonsense. So I like the fact that he's trying to tell them what to do. But if essentially we are going to need to go beyond the proposals of people like Rand Paul and Ron Paul to audit or even to eliminate the Fed. It is true that it is bankrupt. That's based on my study. I think that that's very much the case. They have an enormous amount of liabilities that have no possibility of being covered. But I think that what we're going to really need to do is to bring in Alexander Hamilton. Mm-hmm. I'm strongly of the opinion that there are certain ideas of the American system of economics which have been used under our great presidents, including the greenbacks under President Lincoln, mm-hmm. which are the right vehicle to bring in here. Because essentially, I'll paint it to you this way. So Michael Bloomberg is best friends with Mark Carney, who's the head of the Bank of England. And Michael Bloomberg was just recently the UN ambassador for green economy or some nonsense mm-hmm. like this. Mark Carney just took over for him. Mm-hmm. They together are conspiring to eliminate all financing for fossil fuel projects. And so, Mark Carney has a program which is he's got 130 of the largest banks in the world with a climate pact, mm-hmm. where they say, if you start to finance fossil fuel projects, then we're going to drive you out of business. Right. We're going to starve you completely. And if you think about, Bloomberg saying we need to get rid of all the coal power plants, he's basically telling West Virginia, go to hell and die. I don't care about you at all, which is exactly, sincerely, that's what they're doing. Right. So with that in consideration, it's not merely that the Federal Reserve is a disaster or that it's been a tool of evil globalism, which I think is a very appropriate, judgment of it. Sure, but rather that we've reached a moment in history where you got to figure out a better system of a monetary system. And that leads me to, what was on my, perhaps you can share some of the photos that we had at Wildwood, because in my leaflet and as well that we got out widely, we were saying it's time for, instead of having these central bankers run the world's economy, we should get together President Trump, President Putin, President Xi Jinping, mm-hmm. and other leaders. We've talked about Modi of India, we've talked about Abe of Japan, but particularly those three strategic Daniel, powers.
I'm so confused right now. I'm so confused. You're suggesting that sovereign nations, should send their leaders to talk to each other and not these shadow bankers controlling. That's so weird.
Suzanne, you have got to come to this conference that our international organization is hosting in April, because, when I was telling people, this is the economics of national sovereignty. Right. What are the economics of this? It's not merely tariffs. Tariffs were part of the American system. It's not. I don't have anything against tariffs.
They're in here.
Yeah, exactly.
They're in the little Constitution. They're in the book. So before they changed it so they could tax me with my income, they were in before that part.
So if we want to actually use the tools that our founding fathers gave us and that our great leaders gave us, then we can get tens of trillions of dollars of credit into things that we need in this country, and it's going to go into the hands of private firms, like the private firms who built the transcontinental rail system,
Correct.
and those are Americans, and they're going to use that to make in America once again.
Yes.
So, there's a lot more on that.
But the joy of these, we had Obama always talking about shovel-ready projects. What we found out that meant in Chicago was the shovels were ready to put up the sign about the projects, but we didn't actually get to the projects. But, it's something I've always talked about. The government doesn't have an army of builders. It doesn't have an army of road layers. It doesn't have an army of steel workers. Those are private individuals that are then contracted by the government. So when the government's doing infrastructure projects, as we've seen many times over, the people are the ones who get to do the work. The people are the ones who benefit from that economically. Coming from Nevada, that's why you saw the Hoover Dam.
Yes.
The Hoover cities, the Hoover 10 cities
Yes.
became so disturbed about, were created because the American people were so in a down low period at that point economically.
Yes.
This huge infrastructure project, this big idea was being promoted to them. So they all went out and waited and waited and waited until those jobs were actually able to be, many people lost everything sitting out there waiting for those jobs. But that's the position Americans were in.
Yeah.
We had destroyed ourselves economically. When there's finally something big and visionary that happens, we're desperate. The people are desperate to get involved and to jump on board with that.
Don't you want to see Trump? Can you imagine Trump opening the Hoover Dam?
Yeah.
And I mean, okay, so what's the Hoover Dam today? Right? We should be thinking like that. Because it's about what do we want to give to the generations that come after. The great thing about the Hoover Dam is it's still here.
It's still
here.
Producing massive amounts of power.
Yes.
Vital component in the Southwest energy production system.
And it was a gift that people gave to their grandchildren and their great grandchildren, and we need to do that again. I'll say one last thing because I don't want to take too much more of your time, Suzanne. It's been really fun.
And then we'll ask a few questions on how people can help you. We'll talk a little bit about the nitty gritty, like the fundraising and how you're doing with that and what we can do.
Okay, very good. So I want to just share with you that I'm really focused on getting to the campuses. And, I'm going to be speaking at NJIT next week, which is the major technical institute in New Jersey. And when we go to these places, what we find is that there are a lot of people who are thinking about the future. Mm-hmm. And many of them are being drawn into the green cult.
Yes.
Which is what it is. And it's a dangerous anti-human cult that they're being drawn into. But most of them are actually not yet committed in one direction or another. And so we're taking those people and we're just telling them straight out, the Green New Deal is genocide. Right. That's what's wrong with this, is that it's designed to kill people. And we're talking about how Prince Philip has said that he wants to come back as a deadly virus to help with the problem of overpopulation. And this is the guy who started the World Wildlife Fund, mm-hmm. And you're going to go along with that. And it's having an effect. And so I just want to say we got to keep getting to the campuses and recruiting people into something future oriented. And I think that's why this space program idea, I would really encourage any of your listeners who's thinking this way, you can go out and support Trump's Artemis program. You can do it. It's his program. And he said last night, we need full funding. Right. And that's going to be a really good way to crack this cynicism.
Yeah, I think so. I think so as well. And I do know that the best place to really push some of these things through is right up there in that beautiful white building, just a few miles from my house. But I also know something about getting in that white building. It is not cheap to run a campaign. And it's not cheap once you get up in there. As you know, the fundraising never stops. That's what one of the dirty little secrets we have about politics is that, we think we send our congressmen and senators up here to solve all our problems. And we're actually sending them up here to fundraise a lot and try to, in between that, solve the problems. So how is the fundraising going for you? Where are you seeing funds coming to your campaign in New Jersey? Are you seeing national funds? And what can we, my viewers and their reach, do to support your campaign? Because as you know, we're a MAGA movement. We're national. We support candidates across the country. And that's certainly how we're succeeding in really taking back our government.
Well, I can tell you that I need a lot more fundraising. Uh, we've had some. We've been. I look at the things that we've been able to do. We went to the Wildwood rally. We had 25 people there.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked around. I saw the other Senate candidates. Actually, one of them, I didn't even see him. And they didn't have practically anyone.
Right.
I saw maybe 3 or 4, people working. No big, beautiful signs. We had wonderful signs. We had a chorus singing Beethoven and singing. Yeah, and we were singing the Daniel Burke for Senate campaign song, which I'll put that up on my
Right. Yeah.
But on burkeforsenate.com, people can contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to increase the rate of contributions that are coming in. We've had some exciting stuff, but we need to increase that rate so that we can actually get a lot of social media ads out there. Right. And that's one of the things that I'm focused on being able to do, because the situation is pretty wild in Jersey. I mean, it's a totally corrupt state, and you have this Booker has raised and spent all of this money, and he's got this enormous name recognition and so forth. And the Republican Party, let me say, is not putting up any sort of bold, well-equipped challenger. They're not doing that. You can take a look. There's some people who are running, but people should support me, because here's a chance for independent leadership that actually has to do with ideas.
Right.
And we are not beholden to, I am not beholden to any, we don't go to some back room and say, all right, well, I'll help you out if you do this. I'm not doing that.
As an independent, you won't have access to that. You will not have the RNC come down and say, if you would just run next time, we'll totally give you the seat. You won't have any of that, because, and I think a wise decision, understanding the demographics of New Jersey, as you said, very independent, strong. That certainly is a wise move to make in your area, in the race you're running. So
I want to make a breakthrough, and the breakthrough is going to be if we win our policies, and the breakthrough is going to be if we just sort of, kick down the doors of these stupid green globalist, Nazi bankers, and people who aren't sort of either too afraid to talk about it, or they don't see it, or they're brainwashed. We have to deal with this right now, because there's just this beautiful future in front of us. But if we don't have the tools to carry out President Trump's promises, I don't think we'll be able to get there. I think we're going to run into a lot of trouble.
I agree. Well, and Daniel, I've now figured out you are the anti-Bernie Sanders. You're like the inverse of, because literally it's the same kind of reaching out to the people. He's an independent, just like you are, but obviously you have affiliations very strongly with one side of the political aisle right now.
Yeah, with Trump.
But you want to do the opposite of everything he wants to do. Rather than give away free stuff, you want to empower people to earn their own stuff. Rather than give more power to the global banking system and more collectivism, you want less of that. You want more national sovereignty and individual sovereignty, economic and physical. Literally the opposite. And frankly, your hair's the opposite as well, Daniel. So I think we're going to do really well. Thank you for coming on the show. We're going to share all your links. We're going to put this together on the show and do a standalone video. I'm going to share this out to people. I hope you come back in a little while, and hopefully you can tell me we've done some good fundraising. We have a lot of great candidates out there, and I'm glad to add you to the list. You're going to make me break a rule, though. Because I, of course, have said to everybody, vote red no matter what. But Daniel, you're going to be my exception. You're going to be my asterisk.
That's a really wonderful vote of confidence, Suzanne. I've had a wonderful time talking to you, and thank you very much.
And thank you for making the decision to run. I know it's a very stressing, taxing thing to do, but it is in service to our country, and it is certainly in service to our future and to the future of the American people. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for being on the show. We appreciate you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Suzanne. Take care.